Tonight, I'd like to tell you a ghost story, maybe perhaps appropriate for the season, about wearable technology as a series of disappearances, the way I see it as disappearances. My background is in art history. It's not in technology. So I'm looking at dress, wearable technology from the standpoint of the history of dress and dressing and garments and what it means in a sense. So my book, Garments of Paradise, Wearable Discourse in the Digital Age, is a book whose title, it's really about wearable technology emerging really as part of a culture and history of dress. And the title is from Giorgio Agamben, the Italian philosopher who's written about dress, and he's written about biometrics. And when he talks about dress, he reminds us that there is a sort of point in the Judeo-Christian tradition where in paradise, Adam and Eve wore these garments of light, or their garments made of heaven. The interpretations vary. And it was in after the fall that they realized that they were nude. He says Adam and Eve were not naked, rather they were covered with clothing of grace, which clung to them as a garment of glory. So to me, the involvement of dress and technology is such that wearable technology is a kind of vehicle for our dream of technological perfection, this sort of return. And we're trying to return somehow back to that state of grace by enhancing our bodies to sort of beyond their physical capabilities. The idea of enhancements, your bodily enhancements has a long history, as long as the history all of dress is involved with the idea of physical enhancement in some way. Just examples from the early 20th century, the idea took a real lurch forward in the period of the World Wars, and we had the rise of a number of things. We had a rise of interest in eugenics here as well as in Germany. We had the rise of amazing stories and comic book superheroes that often as not had garments or devices that somehow helped them overcome the limitations of the body. By the 1980s, with the rise of computers, of course, superheroes became cyborgs, like the one in the Terminator James Cameron movie that was an actual influence on Thad Starner, who was one of the first people at the MIT Media Lab who began wearing his computer. And I'm showing you the Terminator's view, as we all saw it in the movie, was something that captured the imagination of Thad Starner. And you see him over here. In the 1990s, he wrote a paper that was never published, but he circulated it throughout MIT, that wearable computers would become a combination of man and machine, an organism more powerful than either. So obviously, this idea of enhancement you find throughout all of the papers and the language and the interviews with the people who are working at this time at the MIT Media Lab, including Thad, who later became one of the people working who developed the Google Glass. So it was a great time at MIT, this period of the mid-90s, and this is a classic photograph of the people mostly students, at the lab who began to form their own sort of working group. They called themselves the Borg Lab, after Star Trek, and they were all working on different versions of wearable computers. That's Steve Mann on the left, far left, and Thad Starner on the far right. So the first disappearance is a disappearance of the body in favor of these technologies that we can wear that will enhance us. And the disappearance of the body also applies to this notion of just sort of becoming invisible. An idea that is a kind of supreme enhancement. If you can don a cloak or put on a cap and you have your body disappear altogether, you have the ultimate advantage. It goes way back to Greek mythology. European folklore refers to the tarn caps or tarn helms that rendered characters in various myths, or in this case, an illustration from one of Wagner's operas, render them invisible. The Invisible Man, H.G. Wells' 1897 novel, where a scientist finds a potion, develops a potion that renders his body invisible to the naked eye, and of course, his enhancement is such that he runs amok, which I think is prescient. And of course, camouflage rendering us invisible, rendering soldiers invisible so that they can accomplish tasks that they couldn't otherwise accomplish. Get rid of the body so that you can accomplish more. And there are several initiatives working on active camouflage at this time that literally would enable a soldier's body to disappear altogether. At the same time, and I'm talking about this from the 1980s and 90s, the idea of the uploading of the brain is a kind of similar idea that you sort of don't need the body. You could actually upload the brain into a computer. And there are people that still are working on this idea, the idea of the mind as kind of data. People like Hans Moravec or Marvin Minsky or Ray Kurzweil, futurists who still holds the hope that this kind of thing might be done, that we could somehow maintain consciousness in the computer and lose this sort of this shackle, this mortal coil altogether. From disappearing bodies to disappearing technology. With the rise of augmented reality, we have this idea of the interface between ourselves and our computers actually disappearing completely. We don the computers, and then the interface actually disappears. And the key person here is Mark D. Weiser, who was the chief scientist at Xerox PARC. In 1998, he coined the term ubiquitous computing, or Ubicomp, and I know you're all familiar with this. He felt that the less we saw of computers, the less we had to deal with the computational aspects of what they were doing, the more they would calm us down. This was supposed to be a calm technology, and this has been much discussed recently. There's an anthology about ubiquitous computing out from MIT Press called Throughout, in which the idea of calmness is scrutinized. In any event, Weiser believed it. The thing is, Weiser died in 1999. So would his ideas have evolved? We don't know. But they provided a dominant paradigm for much of the work that's being done in tangible interfaces and wearable computers today. He said in one of his famous articles, the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. So ubiquitous computing underestimates the body and enables instantaneous or invisible communication with the world, or with each other, or with data. And among its critics, its critics have called it iniquitous computing rather than ubiquitous computing. But we could discuss that later. Rosalind Picard, working at MIT Press with Thad Starner and other people in that crucial period of the 1990s, based her work on Mark Weiser's work, based her work on the notion of invisible computing. She developed and coined the phrase affective computing. And I know that there's a whole Eyebeam panel on affective computing that's going to take place a little later. It really sounds good. Rosalind Picard founded the Affective Computing Group at the MIT Media Lab and worked with the Things That Think Consortium. And for her, affective computing is computing that relates to, arises from, or deliberately influences emotions. The system reads us. But she said in her very first book, Affective Computing, which was published, I think, in '97, but I'm not interested in how we feel about computers. Which was kind of, I think, a shortcoming. So she worked at the Media Lab with students like Jennifer Healy. She published an article called Affective Wearables, in which she described how perfect it was to apply the idea of sensing systems to clothing and jewelry. It was already located near our pulse points, and things that looked like jewelry could be, a perfect wearable affective systems. So I wanted to talk about this Startle Cam, which doesn't really look like jewelry. It's not very stylish. Wasn't even very stylish then. But it was the idea of a sort of body area network that coordinated galvanic skin response and temperature, and a little camera. The Startle Cam was to register a startled response in a wearer so that it would be monitored by a third party. So if you wanted to make sure that your daughter would be okay at night, you would send her out on her date with a Startle Cam, and you would be if if you felt that you might get in trouble, you could go out. You have to read the article Affective Wearables because it is a little bit unbelievable. As I can see, you're not really believing me, but this was one of the this was the main sort of affective wearable idea that was put forward at this time. But there have been a lot of people. I mean, you could go back to the mood ring of the 1970s, which is this idea of a sort of a ring that you wear in your hand that shows your emotions to everybody else. It sort of automatically reads your emotions without your input. Here emotions are on display but underestimated. Other wearables designers along the way, 2004, Lisa Stead at the Royal College of Art created a garment that would read your emotions, and then it would light up and show people what you were feeling or what you were thinking, which seems like a kind of betrayal of privacy, but to me. But with the rise of cognitive psychology and neurophenomenology, a lot of other people had completely different ideas about emotions. So the idea with affective computing is that emotions are, they're important and we need to read them. But we don't really have to ask the owner of the emotions much about them. And Antonio Damasio, I just wanted to introduce this completely different point of view that he had. He's a researcher, wrote The Feeling of What Happens, who says that emotions are necessary to think, that we can't think without emotions, but that emotions, which are our major interface with the world, we really can't put information together, that we have to feel our feelings and know that we are feeling them, according to Damasio, in order to be intelligent beings. It's a completely different point of view. So he says emotions, even negative ones, the ones that the ubiquitous computing people would like to get rid of, even negative emotions are necessary, and we need to be aware of them. Today, wearables based on ubiquitous and affective computing proliferate. It's mostly the idea behind Thad Starner's worked on those, the Google Glass, or the shirt that can read your temperature and stress levels automatically without asking you any questions, asking you about it. And they most often today, more and more, are utilizing fashion or stylishness to inspire desire. Now, I'm interested in wearable technology that's being done here and there around the world that doesn't work to be a product prototype, that doesn't work to become seamless or perfectly polished or be able to read you, but operate as artworks, and artists who are creating them are creating wearables that in a sense get in the way, or they create trouble, or they demonstrate something to make the idea of wearables more visible, as opposed to design, which always tries to please. I think back in the 30s, the designer Henry Dreyfuss came up with the idea of user friction. I mean, ubiquitous computing wants to get rid of user friction, so everything is sort of seamless and automatic. These artists definitely don't. This one does not use technology, but it's an example of an artist who is interested in embodying emotion and thinking about the emotion. She's a kind of Damasio artist who does these garments that embody certain ideas or emotions or feelings or states of being, and then she wears them. And she, of course, takes photographs of herself and shows them, but she also talks a lot about wearing them around the streets and feeling the actual physicality of the emotion that she's representing. So for the technology, Joanna Berzuska is the main artist, and I'm showing you examples of the kind of work that she does that tries to make you, in a sense, uncomfortable. Itchy is a dress with the scarves around the neck that was created by Joanna in 2007. And it's really uncomfortable to wear, so you keep moving the tubes around the neck so that they stop itching you. And as you move it, you create the electricity to light up others of the tubes, which actually light up. So you're creating the energy through your discomfort to make the garment. Now, this isn't useful for anything. It's only useful to help us think about, dress and technology and how we utilize technology and whether we want it to be comfortable or not. Another one would be the leeches that she developed, and these are really kind of visually very beautiful. They clip onto garments and they suck energy. Their purpose is to simply suck energy and demonstrate the energy consumption power of wearable technology. Or her scorpion's garments. These garments are constructed so that they move around the body on their own and the seams open and close. So you're not in control of the technology. The technology has its own life. And you sort of have to deal with it on its own terms. As opposed to technological empowerment, here we were overwhelmed by technology. So I like this work because it makes us think about some of the basic assumptions that we tend to forget about how technology always has to make our lives easier, make us calm, and we don't have to worry about anything. So it's nice to be reminded that maybe we need to think about technology. Maybe we need to keep watch on it and keep aware. And the Whipwreck smoke dress, I just wanted to end with. This dress simply erases the body and brings me back to the theme of invisibility. Fills with smoke until you can no longer see.